Until 1993, women were completely excluded from the clinical trials. Drugs that we use today, like ibuprofen, has never been tested on women. At the age of 30, you have about 10% of the eggs from your ovarian reserve left.
This is the real of building a conscious business. The hard-earned lessons, unfiltered truths, and impactful guests. Welcome to Confessions of a Conscious CEO. In this episode, I'm joined by Stasa Stankovic, CEO and co-founder of OvartiX, who's using her Cambridge PhD to pioneer therapeutic solutions in women's reproductive health. We dive into surprising and honestly shocking truths about women's health, like why ibuprofen has never been tested on women, how egg quality is 60% genetic and 40% nurture, and how stress and sleep can drastically impact fertility. Whether you're a female founder or simply want to better understand and support women's health, this conversation is a must listen. And before we dive in, if you're a founder or aspiring entrepreneur, I have a brand new free course called GTM Essentials. In just 12 bite-sized lessons, I'll help you identify the right customer problem, create offers people are excited to buy, and build a sustainable brand, marketing, and sales engine. I've poured all of my lessons and learnings after 10 plus years of marketing and GTM experience, growing billion-dollar brands and scaling my own startups. You'll also get a complimentary Notion workbook to implement everything you learn. Enroll now for free at selenaho.com/GTM-essentials or via the link down below. And now let's dive in. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you, Stasa. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're in the middle of raising your seed round, as we were just talking about, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, super excited to talk to you about all topics related to women's health, being a female founder, I guess, and then the whole journey. Really excited. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So let's just dive in. What made you want to start getting into healthcare and also just founding your own company?
I come from family full of medics. So even though I was throughout my whole life trying to escape medicine and healthcare because of all the crazy working hours that my parents were going through as clinicians, I didn't run away too far. And I spent all my childhood doing acting, doing figure skating professionally, and actually entered the film studies at the same time as medicine.
Wow.
That just tells you how close I was to completely move away from healthcare. But I guess, as I said, the reality isn't that. I ended up in healthcare, I guess, because I was seeing how incredibly important it is to solve these problems that affect all of us. And especially coming from Serbia, so I'm originally Serbian, where matriarchy is quite prominent and female leadership and female voice is incredibly well present. You know, having my mom and my grandma as incredible role models made me think about how important it is to study women and to study female wisdom and also their bodies. And I guess one thing led to another, and here we go, 10 years later, I am trying to lead the change and pave the path for the future of how we discover novel therapeutics for women's health.
Amazing. So we're going very fast forward, but I know you have a PhD from Cambridge, which is no small feat. And so what was your research and how did that lead you into finding OvartiX?
I moved to the UK 10 years ago. I firstly entered the University of Oxford, where I was studying biomedicine, which is a mixture of kind of molecular genetics and actual medicine. And then after that, that led me into moving to University of Cambridge, where I was doing my master's and my PhD in genomic medicine. And genomic medicine was going through a very kind of revolutionary period at the point when I was entering my master's, because we started having incredible amount of data on the human population and how their genetic code is associated to different conditions that we experience throughout the life. So I think I was in the center of the ecosystem where genetic changes were driving the future of healthcare, and I just couldn't resist not to go down that route. So then I ended up, I guess, following up more in details the female health angle of genomic medicine. And what I was doing is really, I was trying to understand what is the genetic architecture behind how ovaries age and function, and how can we use that knowledge to really unlock the basic biological mechanisms that are driving the association between ovarian aging and function and different conditions that are associated. I always like to have a little metaphor, like if you're driving to a destination that you don't know the journey and the path to. If you don't have a GPS, there is no way that you're going to reach the end goal. So
Right.
similar thing happens with trying to find novel therapeutics or biomarkers for conditions. If you don't understand the basic biological mechanisms that are paving the path of how the disease happens, you won't be able to find solutions. I really fell in love into the genomic medicine approach because it gave me the opportunity to access the problem at the DNA level and understand what is the difference in the genetic barcodes, as I like to call them, between different individuals, and why some women go through the menopause at the age of 50, while some other ones go through the menopause at the age of 30, and then how that impacts their general quality of life, health span, but also like how and if they show up to work. Because we know that reproductive journey of a woman is incredibly associated not only to their fertility, but just general lifestyle and also general health.
Wow. So there's a lot there, and I want to talk a lot about women's health and reproductive health. But before we get there, some of my listeners, as well as me, are not as educated as you are in medicine and just in health sciences. So can you explain, when you talk about genomic medicine or reproductive genomics, like what does that actually mean? Just like really dumbed down level.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess for the first time ever, about, well, maybe 2 decades ago, we got access at the DNA level to understand what are those genes in our DNA or our genome that are impacting the risk of certain conditions. So what it means is, like, if you're reading a book, right, the book will contain different letters that make words and then sentences. Similar thing happens with our DNA. The DNA contains many, many different letters that when combined together would lead to different meanings. And those meanings are different risks for certain conditions. So depending on the mutations that you carry in your genetic code, that will determine your risk or lack of risk for certain conditions. So what I'm trying to do is understand, for example, between you and I, what is that genetic barcode that is different between you and I, and how that impacts the conditions or the risk for certain conditions that I will have throughout my life versus the ones that you will have throughout your life. So we now know that certain parts of our DNA are correlated with the risk of, for example, infertility or polycystic ovarian syndrome. So what genomic medicine allows me to do is go deeply into our DNA and understand what are those genetic mutations that I have or someone else has that are correlated or not to these conditions. And then that unlocks a completely new world to, if we understand those simple biological mechanisms, can we then take them and translate them into drug discovery opportunities or biomarker opportunities and really understand kind of the root cause of what we carry in our DNA and how that impacts all these conditions.
That's amazing. That is so fascinating.
I hope that makes sense.
No, I get it. I think this is such important work. And so now translating it more into specific real life scenarios. So women that are listening, what are things you wish were more prevalent, more talked about? I mean, there's so much. We've talked about this before, but just generally, what do you want to dive into? What do you want to share?
I guess I would love to take a step back and now kind of marry that genomic medicine world to the reproductive world that you mentioned, starting initially with reproductive aging and what it is. It's a biological phenomenon that every single woman in this world will go through. And what that in theory is, it's a decline of egg quality and egg quantity in your ovarian reserve that ultimately throughout life at the end leads to menopause. So as women, I think that's something that when I talk to my friends who don't necessarily have a medical background, I don't think that we realize that we are born with a limited number of eggs in our ovaries. And that number of eggs is not renewable, meaning that it only goes down through your reproductive lifespan. So depending on how many eggs you're born with and how quickly they die throughout life, that will determine the timing of your menopause, but also your infertility or fertility potential and the risk of various conditions that I guess ovarian aging is linked to. What we don't get as women is that when I mention the word menopause or when we talk about fertility, we all think that we're pretty much going through the same journey as women. about 10% of women don't have menopause at the age of 50, which is an average age when women go through menopause. We have 10% of women in our population that go through early menopause. They will experience menopause at around the age of 40 or 45. Wow. But if you kind of digest that a little bit more, usually when we mention menopause, we think, okay, this is the time when I also become infertile. Actually, 10 years before we go into menopause is when infertility starts happening. So that major decline in the number of eggs that we have 10 years before actually that menopause happens is when infertility kicks in. So imagine those women that are experiencing early menopause at around the age of 40, for example. That means that they will start facing infertility issues at the age of 30.
Wow.
And with all the social trends that we have with delaying parenthood and wanting to have babies when we are all sorted out in terms of our career, that's a complete clash between what biology is doing to us and what we actually want to do in real life in terms of the social patterns. So that's why I fell in love with studying ovarian aging and ovarian function and trying to better understand, can we control that? Can we potentially delay menopause to allow extra number of years, not only in terms of fertility, but also enabling better health span to women through better reproductive lifespan, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. I just learned so much. I had no idea that you were basically infertile 10 years before menopause. I had no idea.
At the age of 30.
My mind is being blown right now.
At the age of 30, which I assume we're
I'm in my 30s. Yeah.
Same here. At the age of 30, you have about 10% of the eggs from your ovarian reserve left. So 90% of your ovarian reserve is wiped out.
I'm freaking out right now.
But that's the problem, right? How do we understand biology better? So that we empower women rather than freak them out with these stats. So that's why I think the beauty of the approach of really getting down to the bottom line of how the heck these things are happening. Like, why are the ovaries the number one organ that ages the fastest in our body?
Wow.
So if you think about menopause, that's basically when ovaries become geriatric, right? They lose their function. You are not reproductively active anymore. So why the heck do ovaries age 5 times faster? And, by the time you hit the age of 45 or 50, they stop their function in comparison to the rest of the body where, we live now 85, 90 years old. So where is the synchrony coming from? That's what we're trying to understand to then help women make informed decisions. And that's the beauty of it, I guess.
This is such important work. You should feel so proud. This is so important. And so there's so much there. There's the preventative piece I want to talk about, and then there's kind of the reactive piece I want to talk about as well. So let's start with the preventative piece. I think first and foremost, amplifying what you're doing is so important because even I wasn't aware of what you're telling me now. And had I been aware, I could have done things differently. Like I'm still early in my 30s, it's fine. But someone listening to this might be like, oh my gosh, like I'm trying to get pregnant. It's so difficult. I didn't know why. So preventative side, what can women do or what should women be doing?
Historically, the women's health space has been under the veil of taboo. We've been putting things under the carpet for such a long time. So, if you look at our understanding of what we can do from both preventative and intervention side of things, there is not much. Just because there was so much kind of underfunding, under research, under everything around women's health. So, if you don't understand the basic biological mechanisms, as I said before, if you don't have the GPS to the final destination, well, you can't innovate, you can't create novel IP, and you can't have novel biomarkers and novel therapeutic approach work with this topic. So I always love to say that, until 1993, women were completely excluded from the clinical trials. So most of the drugs that we use today, like, ibuprofen, for example, has never been tested on women.
Really?
So that just kind of gives you the stress test and the reality of where we are with this. And now going back to your question, what can we do today? I guess that the problem with women's health and in terms of from the kind of preventative side of things, we do have quite a lot of sex hormones that are routinely tested in the clinic in terms of trying to better understand your ovarian reserve. Those, for example, include follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, anti-Mullerian hormone, AMH, luteinizing hormone, LH, these are the things that you can freely and actively access through different routinely conducted blood tests. However, the problem with those is that they don't have long-term predictive capability. What I mean by that is, for example, we can take those now and we can understand how our ovarian reserve looks at the moment. So it will tell us whether we have a good ovarian reserve or not. What is the current situation in terms of our fertility potential? The problem is they don't have long-term predictive potential. So they can't tell you what is going to happen in the next year or 2 years or 3 years, meaning that you can't really rely your choices and your decision on the result of this test. The big problem with that is that it basically tells you that women are not in control of their body. They can know what is happening right now, but they can't predict or they can't plan their fertility journey based on these tests. So I always like to say, by the time, if you detect that these hormones are not at the levels where they should be, it's pretty much too late to do anything about it. I know that this sounds very, very much negative, but that also goes back to the reality that we should do these tests more often. And there are quite a lot of startups across the UK and the US that are trying to raise the awareness and educate women. Let's test these. Let's become more in touch and in contact with our bodies to figure out what's happening. Let this be a routine test that we do, maybe not every year, but every 2 years to better understand and have contact, I guess, our reproductive systems. What we're trying to do, and we can, I guess, dive a little bit deeper into that, we are trying to use genetics to better understand how can we create these long-term predictive tests that will very much in advance tell us if I'm going to be the case of early menopause or not. One of my best friends, she sat me down and she was like, Stasha, I thought that your work is really cool. And I always find it fascinating. But I kind of always thought that this is very far from what I'm experiencing. Like, oh, I'm just going to be fine. I'll have kids when I'm 35. 2 years ago, she sat down with me and, crying for an hour. And she was like, Stasha, I just found out that I'm in perimenopause, 28 years of age. 28 years of age. So until it happens, you always think, oh, it's not happening or it's happening to someone else. And then that just brings the whole reality of how broken the system is in terms of how much we can help women in terms of enabling them to make their own choices. But then also, what can we do besides IVF and egg freezing?
Yeah, and so before we talk about IVF and egg freezing, I wanted to talk about the test a little bit. So just to be clear, for women that want to find out more about themselves and want to advocate for their reproductive health, what are the tests they should be asking their doctors for? What are these things called?
FSH, LH, AMH. Those are the names of the sex hormones that are indicative of what your ovarian reserve looks like.
So it's just testing the levels.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Testing the levels. And you can also do a follicle count in your standard gynecological visit.
Okay. Cool. So that being said, let's move on now to the egg freezing IVF, because this has become so talked about, which is great.
Yeah.
But I remember in our previous conversation, you said people tend to have a very transactional relationship with egg freezing and IVF. And so I want to talk about that because they're often investing so much resources and time into it. They desperately want a baby. I get it. Yeah. But what's the reality? And do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
IVF and egg freezing are an absolute revolution. Firstly, in terms of what we do to help patients conceive and create a family. I guess that's the first thing that we have to say about them. Yeah. The second thing is that it's not all pink. It's not all gloomy. And if you look at the numbers, 2 decades ago, this is where we introduced IVF and egg freezing as technologies to help women and couples conceive. We have about 120% raise in terms of how adopted they became since the very first time they happened, 120%. But if you compare that to the success rate that a single cycle has, a single cycle fails for about 70% of couples.
Wow.
So the success rate since the time when we started, utilizing IVF and egg freezing has remained at about 25%. So what we're trying to do in the kind of IVF and egg freezing setting, or if the round of IVF cycle doesn't work, if you don't get the baby home, the only solution at the moment is just doing it again. If it doesn't work, you load women with more hormones, If it doesn't work, you do it again. If it doesn't work, you do it again. There is no scientific approach in terms of how we direct women to go through this journey in a more medically and scientifically driven way. And I think, how IVF and egg freezing are presented to us as young women is pretty much just put all your eggs in one basket. These are the solutions that are going to save me in case I can't conceive. Well, these stats that we just talked about, they don't look that great, right? So I think that the first thing that us as women have to do is realize, yes, these solutions are there. They're incredibly important, but age and success rates are incredibly important factors that we have to consider when going through this journey. So to your point around transactional approach, couples who have successful fertility journey, they think that IVF is pretty much you pay for it, you get a baby home. It doesn't work that way. On average, women have to go through 3 cycles or more. That introduces an incredible emotional, physical, financial burden to the families that get completely destroyed because of that very long and exhausting journey. You basically become a patient that goes through that journey for a number of years until you get a baby home. We have to stress test the reality of, yes, these solutions exist, but can we make them better? Can we find alternative things to help women have a little bit easier journey in terms of fertility and their reproductive potential?
I think it's so important to talk about this because obviously with so much buzz around egg freezing and IVF, these companies are not going to be like, oh, there's only a 25% success rate. They're obviously not going to market themselves that way.
Of course.
Yeah. And so I think it's so important that women know so that we can be proactive and plan around that.
Exactly. And this is not to scare anyone,
course,
right?
yeah.
Like, we're not trying to talk about it in a negative way, but I think we have this clock ticking in the back of our head when we think about our fertility potential. And usually we don't think about it by the time we hit 30.
Yeah.
And then all of us like, oh, hold on. What are the solutions? What can we do about it? The only thing I'm advocating for is let's be more aware. Let's be more educated. Let's spread the word about how these things function. How can we make women more educated about them so they make proactive decisions rather than waiting, for 5 to 12 to react and then putting quite literally all their eggs into one basket.
Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah.
It's also a level of empowerment, right? When you have this information, you can then make empowered, informed decisions.
Exactly.
And properly family plan versus being so reactive, having no options, and then you're just one path and you have to keep doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we're all very angry on our biology because it doesn't follow what we socially want to do, but that is the reality. So how can we find the ways to empower women to make more informed decisions?
Yeah.
And I guess that's the whole point of now driving healthcare towards more preventative and proactive approach rather than reactive, I guess.
Yeah. The other part of this whole discussion is the male partners. So I know sometimes they might feel like, oh, it's just all on the female. This is you. This is your body or whatever. But what do you wish people knew more about when it came to male partners and how they fit into this equation?
Us as women, we have a threshold for stress and pain quite high up, right? One of the problem why we're experiencing things that in the way we are is that we're not loud about them. We are kind of sorting them out. We're putting them under the carpet. Oh, I can do this. I can handle this. It's all right. I'm strong. I can do it. The fact is, unless you talk about it, nobody else will know your story and nobody else will share your struggles with you. So I think, in order to empower men to help us women through the fertility journey or any other journey, I think we have to be louder about it. I think we need to take them on our journey to explain how painful it is, how emotionally stressful it is. And it's the fact that female body is not just a more hormonal version of a male body. I think appreciating those differences is just a good starting point. And just being, more loud about it, not really kind of putting, as I said, the veil of taboo around these topics. But it's also our fault. We have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I experience that so much when I'm talking to venture capitalists now, because it's really hard to convince someone that the problem exists if they don't experience that problem. If they're not going through it, they will not realize it's an unmet need.
Yeah.
So by talking more about it, by educating, by being very loud and bold about it, I think that's where the starting point is. And that will also help men to be more supportive. And I don't think the problem is that they're not supportive. I think they're very supportive.
Yeah.
The best advocates for women's health, in my experience, were men who were seeing their wives and their partners going through this really difficult journey and trying to do everything they can to protect them. And then it just becomes a powerful vehicle that, it's a domino effect that just unlocks so many beautiful things.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think if we don't talk about it, there's no awareness, they can't help us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we dive into all that there is there, because I do want to talk about the funding journey, can we talk quickly just about perimenopause and menopause and just tie a bow on that? So what do you wish people knew about that? How can women transition into that era a little bit more gracefully? What are some tips there?
What I said before, we have to be aware that female body is not a more hormonal version of a male body. So I always like to talk about this reproductive system not being just there for fertility opportunities and fertility potential. We now know that, for example, women who go through early menopause are more at risk of having osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, mental health conditions. So it is really obvious, and it's becoming more and more obvious, that ovaries as organs are not just there for the sake of the reproductive activity. They're there to guide and orchestrate the whole female body. There is a beautiful cascade of hormones and the communication between ovaries and the brain and the rest of the body that makes women more or less healthy depending on how their ovarian aging and function behaves. So I think the awareness of appreciating that this is not just fertility, it's so much more than that, is the first step.
Yeah.
Unlike men that are renewing sperm on a daily basis, they have, millions of sperm coming and going on a daily basis. We don't have that. We have that
That's so crazy.
cascade of events just like going down, and it's not stopping. And, I guess, understanding that is a first step in terms of understanding them better, perimenopause and menopause. And finally, these are normal processes. Evolution made them to happen for X, Y, and Z reason. And we can talk about that in terms of why we think menopause exists. And exists, by the way, in only 5 species on this planet. In humans, couple of species of whales, and now monkeys, or specifically orangutans. Nobody else goes through menopause. Why is that? It's such a complex and beautiful topic to talk about from different angles. Going back to your question, it then ties into the preventative and proactive healthcare, and what can we do to actually make that journey a little bit better for women.
And so in your experience and research, I know genes and like what you're born with and your genetics play a big role, but do you think limiting stress, meditating, doing all this, do you think that would help?
Absolutely. We've done quite a lot of studies to understand what is that beautiful interplay between nature versus nurture, and how they together contribute towards earlier age at menopause, or just in general menopause timing. And we now know that about 60% of menopause timing is down to your genetics. So it's down to your genetic barcode that you're born with. But 40% is down to the environment, down to alcohol consumption, food consumption, cigarettes, exercise, stress, sleep. So putting the attention onto those things is incredibly important. A lot of the times people ask me, what can we do today to help women do something proactively until we wait for these genetic tests to come out and all these therapeutic solutions to come out? Well, we can be louder about how environment impacts ovarian aging and menopause. And we have to use public health policies as a vehicle to send that message to a wider population. We also know that these things are not just impacting ourselves. So, for example, if we eat junk food, and that will impact our menopause timing and fertility, but it also impacts future generations. What I mean by that is we've done quite a cool study in the mouse model, where basically we were exposing pregnant mice through the junk food and healthy food. And what we observed is that basically the children that were born from the mothers eating junk food had earlier age at menopause. Well, mice don't go through menopause, but a smaller ovarian reserve in comparison to the ones that were exposed to healthy diet.
Wow.
Which means that healthy diet and exercise and all these things that we loudly talk about don't only impact your health and your fertility potential, but also of your future generations. So it is a transgenerational impact that's going on. So it's incredibly important to be loud and bold about it. And I think the only way is through social media, through public health policies, to give informed decisions and information to women to basically implement these things right away.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to change my entire lifestyle after this. Like rethinking everything. But this is so important. And just quickly, what does your routine look like then? Because you are a founder, you are so accomplished.
Oh, gosh.
You are probably so stressed out. So what do you do? Just easy things that allow you to be healthier.
This is a very difficult question. In a nutshell, nothing. I'm just hyping up myself to go through the fundraising and sending the message out there and try to change the future of how we look at these therapeutic discoveries. Long story short, I think exercise is probably one of the most powerful approaches, and sleep.
Okay.
As a young founder, that really is a difficult decision to make. But I think sleep is incredibly powerful. Sleep, meditation, prayer, whatever version of calming your body down, I guess is what I'm going after. And as an ex-professional athlete, sport and physical activity is incredibly important for me, just to kind of release the tension.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about your fundraising. You are currently raising your first seed round, which is so exciting. And a lot of these VCs are men. And so you're talking about something that is affecting the female body. And you have told me candidly before that sometimes they just don't get it. I've even had friends tell me that they have to go ask their wives or their girlfriends, and it's so frustrating. And so how has this journey been for you? And you're going through it.
It's super exciting. It goes in different waves. What's really interesting about our approach is that it's incredibly scientifically backed. So we spent last 10, 15 years, some of my co-founders, really studying how we can understand better ovarian aging and menopause and fertility in women to unlock novel solutions. So I always feel calm and really cool about it because I know that there is a really incredibly scientifically backed Joker card behind me, setting up the path of how we can revolutionize the future of female health. At the same time, the reality isn't like that. The reality is that quite a lot of times when you talk to people, they have this blank face when they look at you when you talk about women's health. And the reason is probably, as we mentioned before, we don't talk much about it. Unless you suffer from that problem, you wouldn't really understand how big of an issue it is. At the end of the day, it's a half of the population. 50%. It really is frustrating that sometimes you get comments like, oh, there is no product market fit. Oh, we didn't really realize that that's a problem. Or, there is IVF. It surely solves everything that we need to solve. Breaking taboos around what we're talking about, and education is a big part of my fundraising approach, is introducing all these concepts to VCs to bring these topics closer to them and really try to figure out how can I emotionally attach to that. So they buy it because they understand it. They buy it because it's incredibly important. So many people are suffering and going through this journey. And unless you have that emotional attachment, you won't necessarily be able to believe in the team, to believe in the mission, and be there for a very long time. We specifically work on drug discovery, which is a very lengthy process. You're not going to see your revenue in the next 2 years. You're just not going to do it. It's probably going to come in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So really having people who understand the impact and the revolution that you're trying to unlock, it really is difficult.
Yeah.
It really just is. Yeah. I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah. But it's such important work, and you really deserve just all the funding you need because this is so underfunded, so underrepresented, so under-talked about. And so I think that's also why you and Davika started Wealth. So do you want to quickly talk about Wealth and what Wealth is going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 female founders going through a very similar journey around breaking taboos and getting role models in front of our eyes. When I started my entrepreneurial journey, it was very difficult to find people who have done it before. Just by seeing an example, it sometimes makes things easier because you know that someone has done it before, has done it successfully before, and is still the most gorgeous, beautiful, interesting women out there. And that is Devika, my co-founder of Wealth. So we've been fangirling each other for a very long time on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. And then we met and decided that we shared the passion of having more women in the same room, going from different directions and different points of expertise, answering the very same problem. How do we empower female leaders to be more bold, to help each other, to invest in each other? That's how the mission of Wealth was born, to bring more women together in the same room in a very raw and vulnerable way. So they open up not just over a glass of champagne in one of the many networking sessions in many conferences that we go to, but actually build a room where we're okay not to be okay. We're okay to share our struggles and to share our journeys and really be there to open the doors for other women that might be needing that door open, because it really is an interesting journey and a tough journey. And we built, well, it is in a way kind of a members club, a society, a community for women in healthcare, either as VCs, as female founders, as female leaders, lawyers, and from kind of different backgrounds, coming together and trying to see where the synergies are to help each other and enable each other's growth. So we have a number of events, a number of intimate dinners where we bring all these women together to unlock and talk about sensitive topics, to identify the ways and the mechanisms of how we help each other, and just gather together and share the beautiful female journey and leadership that we are, I guess, all going through.
It's such amazing work, and you've both built such an incredible community, so you should be so proud.
Thank you.
And we'll leave links to everything down below. But I want to tie this episode up in a nice bow, because I think we've talked about a lot of very important topics, and sometimes the listeners, this is like the first time they're hearing about something like this. So do you want to have a final note of positive encouragement or something you want to end with?
Things are looking very promising. At least from the women's health perspective, we're starting to see incredible science and incredible medical discoveries seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. One of those solutions is OvartiX, is the company that we are now building to unlock novel drug therapeutic solutions for ovary-centric conditions such as PCOS, infertility, menopause. And we do that in an interesting way where we combine data with different cell-engineered solutions, where we basically build 2D and 3D models of ovaries in the laboratory conditions to enable validation of novel therapeutics. So tying in data, incredible amount of data, and incredible cutting-edge technologies to unlock novel opportunities. That's our way. There are many other companies doing the same thing in a very different perspective and are joining this mission of, making healthcare for women better and, I guess, more accessible as well. So I think things are looking very promising. I think we're starting to ride the wave of interest in women's health. So podcasts like this, people who loudly talk about women's health and the beauty of female leadership and the beauty of acting and enabling better solutions is an incredible way of raising awareness and talking about it. Things are looking also promising in terms of the preventative side of things. We're starting to see and build better tests of predicting age at menopause. One of our works is around that as well, but also other companies and other incredible scientists are on that mission as well. And I think we're getting there. We're coming closer to the ideal scenario where women are just in control of their bodies, are very well educated. And even though maybe for some things we don't have all the solutions in this world, we have knowledge, we have education, and we have ways and paths in terms of how we understand our body. And that's just an incredible start. And we'll figure out the rest through beautiful science, through beautiful medical discoveries. And I think we're on a good way to do so.
Well, thank you so much, Stasa. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks a lot.
And this was just so great.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Confessions of a Conscious CEO. I hope you got a lot out of this episode. If you did, it would mean the world if you subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify and left a rating and review to help more conscious founders discover this show. It would also make my day if you shared this episode to your Instagram stories or LinkedIn and tagged me at Selena Ho or at Confessions of a Conscious CEO. Always cheering you on, and I cannot wait to see what you built from this.